Well, so the last video I'd done on the Smith's watch received quite a lot of views and feedback, so I thought I'd do another one. And well, as you can see, here we are playing with a nice 60s Ingersoll. Now, it's not an Ingersoll Triumph, as you see, but it is an Ingersoll. It wasn't working, but since picking it up, it has now, in fact, started working, which is always the bloody way. Now, you'll notice there's a new camera, and that is the start of the, well, many changes I've had since the last video. So you can see I'm now wearing some finger cots, which were recommended to me. You can see I've got that nice cushion to place the unit on itself, and I've got the blade to open the back. You can see this has got a lovely bit of wear down the rear cover, and well, frankly, I'm not going to change that. The only way to change that, in my opinion, will be to take the finish off and to replate it, and I'm not going to do that. So, opening up the back, you can see it is indeed ticking, made in Great Britain, and there's a 65 on there. And I've been told by a couple of people that implies 1965, which is the year of manufacture. Now, one thing to notice is indeed it looks incredibly similar to the Smith's watch on the inside. Now, I don't know for a fact, but one can only assume that's because it largely is the same. Every single component is the same, including this crystal here made out of plastic, and you can see it has actually got that same brown tint to it as the Smith's watch, which I'd done in the previous episode, if you will. So you can see I've got this lovely little gel cushion to place the watch on, and now I've also got a couple of nice levers to remove the watch hands with. So I haven't gone out and bought all this stuff. I've bought a little bit, but a lot of it has actually just been kindly donated by my cousin, who saw what I was doing, and he says, "Hey, I've got a load of watch stuff you can use." So thank you very much to him. These levers do indeed make the removal of the handles much simpler, and if you recall, I was using a food bag to take the handles off with, and that technique works fine. I've actually got a Bodafini genuine purpose-made bit of plastic now just to do that. And you can see with just a couple of seconds that is the handles removed. And frankly, it is a much easier way of doing it. And finally, it's just the second hand removed now too. I'm actually quite enjoying this second camera angle too. I think it just opens up a little bit what I can see. I still need to play with the cameras because I keep getting a lot of autofocus issues back and forth, and frankly, it annoys me. So if it annoys me, I bet it's annoying at least one of you out there as well. That's assuming that anybody watches this, of course. So there we are, with the watch hands removed. It is now time to remove the 4 screws which actually hold the chassis of the watch, I suppose you'd say, into this outside framework. And you'll recall it's exactly the same as the Smith's watch, where you remove these 4 screws and it should just drop straight through to the inside. Now, Ingersoll is actually the watch brand which got me into this. I got a Ingersoll pocket watch years and years ago. I've been in my early teens, so about probably 15 years ago, and I'd bought it overwound off of eBay, I think. I'd spent a tenner on it, and I pulled it to bits, and frankly, I completely destroyed it. And I'd never got it going again, and I don't know, I think I was so frustrated and wound up, if you'll pardon the pun, that I felt like I had to try and have another go. So it took a few years, and it actually took years and years until a Smith's pocket watch was given to me by a friend of mine. I had given him a bit of a gesture at the time of his father-in-law's passing, and he said, "Look, this is his fob watch, and it doesn't work, but you're welcome to it because I know you like watches and I know you like old things." And I got that working, and I was so pleased that it sort of re-sparked my interest in this hobby. So the face of these watches, it's actually incredibly simple. All it is, or all they are 4 tabs around the outside, which you lever up, and that should allow the face to, well, remove it, actually trying to remove itself there. And underneath that, what you've got is that copper thrust washer, and then you've got the hour wheel underneath that. So called because if you could guess it, it powers the hour hand. Now inside here, what I thought we had was a cannon pinion. And you'll see later in the video it is in fact not a cannon pinion, but what I tried to do at this point is remove it. And frankly, I make a bit of a hash of it, and I simply cannot get it off. So I've got these sort of end pinching tweezer things. Again, these are from my cousin, and you can use them for watch hands, but I had the levers, so I thought I'd use those. And so I try it with them tweezers, I try it with the hand removers, and as you're going to find out, frankly, they wouldn't have it. And then I try it with the tweezers, and they don't have it. And eventually, it just it's one of those where you've got to get it from the right angle. You can't grip it from the wrong angle. Because when later on, which you don't see, I think I did it off camera, I was just sort of playing around. I thought, just before I get it all stripped down and clean, I'll just give it one final go. And I went in with the tweezers, I think, and it just sort of came off. But it's not actually a true cannon pinion. All it is that very small sprocket, basically, and that actually shot off. And then me and the better half, God bless her heart, were scrabbling around on the carpet trying to find it. But such is life. So here I am, I'm just letting down the mainspring. You can see I'm putting the tweezers on the inside, and you can actually get onto the little ratchet, which is effectively keying onto the sprocket, which is the mainspring of the watch. Now the mainspring keeps the, that's where the power comes from. It's bizarre how a watch works. You've got the mainspring, which is all the power, and then you've got a train of gears, and all the train of gears do is let down the mainspring in a fashion which can be controlled and can be indexed to a time, i.e. seconds, minutes and hours. So with a watch like this, which has been stuck for years and not moved, you can guarantee that someone's wound it up to the nth degree, and it needs to be let down. Otherwise, when I undo the screws that I'm undoing here, it will spring apart and you'll be pulling bits of mainspring out of your eyebrows for weeks to come, or you'll wake up in A&E with the sprocket stuck in your eye. So with the removal of these screws, that should allow the removal of the mainspring bridge. Just making sure it all comes together. And that is the mainspring bridge there. And you can see it's actually got a swaged sprocket on, and that will allow the mainspring to be removed. There you go. Just as simple as that. And now what we've got is the bridge for all the sprocket. And I'm just going to cut myself off there. You can see oil all over that, and that is just liquid oil. And that's the issue with these watches, while they stop. If someone leaves it in the drawer for a while, the oil will become basically like a grease. Especially if you start getting the things warm or old, the oil breaks down and it'll just coat all the internals of the watch and turn into a nice sticky grease, which will stop the movement from working, basically. And as I was saying before, how the watch works is a mainspring being let down by the trainer wheels to an indexable speed. Every time it goes from one wheel to the next wheel to the next wheel, it steps down in speed, but also steps down in torque. So by the time you get to the end, it takes such a very small amount of force to stop the trainer wheels from turning, which is why when this oil turns to a grease and effectively breaks the entire lot, it's really easy to stop them. So you can see I've removed these 4 screws. Well, I've removed the 3, and I'm currently undoing that a little bit more. And you can see my index finger is in a very intentional place, and you will understand why it was such a foolish idea to move it then. There it goes. That was the keyless works, the ratchet system which helps you wind the watch, and luckily it didn't go far, and is a big piece anyway. But that's why you've got to watch these things when they're sprung loaded. So you can see that is the balance wheel still attached to that trainer gear bridge, and that's got a hairspring on it, which you'll see a little bit later on. So yes, luckily I managed to get that back. This is the curious thing for me. This is normally the first wheel to remove. This is the second wheel, or seconds wheel, because it operates the seconds hand. And for some reason I can't remove it. So removing that sprocket out of the way, you turn it over and you see this is actually slightly different to the Smith's watch I've worked on in the past, in that this second hand appears to be in two pieces. So you've got a lug on the inside, and then the second hand crimps down to that. So with the second hand removed, I can pull that off, and then that second wheel should indeed come off. Just like that. And you can feel when you're trying to take these out that every single one of them is worn and sticky, so it's just not really wanting to move. And here we are back on the mainspring. They should be able just to relieve this top cover. I always forget the name of this part, to be honest with you. I think it's an anvil or something like that, but regardless, that's removed, and now we need to take the spring out of this, and we'll do this quite carefully. And you see what I do is I sort of pry one end of it up, and then I stick my thumb under it, and then I transfer it to the other thumb, and then back to the other thumb, and back to the other thumb, and I effectively just walk it all the way out. You see as I'm trying to do here, I walk it all the way out so it doesn't just fire itself off, because that can actually destroy the spring when it fires itself out like that. That rapid decompression of it can knacker it. And you can see we've got that folded edge on the end of the spring, and we've got that sort of key on the inside of that sprocket there, and that's what makes a manual wine watch like this different to an automatic wine watch. An automatic wine watch cannot be overwound because that spring has got friction grease on the inside of it, and it just sticks it. It goes round and round and round. But these, when you overwind them, you snap that part of the spring off. So I said I've had some donations from my cousin, and I bought some other bits, and this is one for him. And this turns out to be a mistake, actually. So what this is the basket for an ultrasonic cleaner, which is fascinating, and we'll show you in just a moment. And if from the last video, I was there with I was putting it in like a 99% alcohol to try and dissolve the grease, and then I was rubbing it off by hand. And what I'm doing here is I'm loading it all into this basket to put it into an ultrasonic cleaner, which is a fantastic device which actually creates its own abrasion by pulsing ultrasonic sound beams into this basket, which then reflect off the components and effectively create little bubbles to appear via cavitation, and when the bubbles pop, it removes a bit of dirt. So you can see in the other room, here's the basket, here's the cleaner, already full of its solution, and we shut the lid, set the time, and then turn it on. So now we've got some nice gratuitous shots of the components in the ultrasonic cleaner. So you can see it almost looks like they're boiling. It's not boiling. Not boiling at all, but you can see that you've got these little bubbles constantly appearing and disappearing, and it's this cavitation which actually cleans the parts. Now I have to say, it does an absolutely fantastic job of cleaning the parts, especially getting the grease on. You bring them out and every single one is bone dry of grease and oil. So you can see there, we've got some nice shiny brass work, and you can see the bubbles just appearing on the corners there and moving around. You can see there we've got a nice little bubble skittering all over that that mainspring gear there, and that's what's providing the actual cleaning. Now the solution you put it in is again a degreaser, and now I was finished with the degreasing, and that is just a cold water bath, and I'm just running it through a final cycle with the cold water to try and remove all of that degreaser. Now here is where the issue comes from. All the parts are fantastically clean. They're lovely and degreased, and you can see that there. I mean, just look at the blues on that mainspring and on that keyless works piece of steel there, and look how shiny all of the platings are. But also look how dull all the brass has gotten. Now, I don't know if this is a coincidence. I don't know if it'd have done the same in water, but what I think has happened is the cleaning solution which was supplied with the ultrasonic, not supplied, but that I got for the ultrasonic cleaner, I think that has reacted with the brass to create I don't know, some sort of oxide, probably copper oxide or zinc oxide within the brass, which has caused it to go dark. Now this sort of plagues me for the rest of the assembly process, but you know, this is the nature of the beast when you're a hobbyist at something like this. I'm not a horologist. I don't do this for a living. I do this because I enjoy it. And the reason I'm recording it is I actually wanted to send a photo or the video to a family member, and I couldn't find an easy way to do it, so I uploaded it to YouTube and then sent them a link. And at the time of recording this, I'd had about 5,000 people watch that video, which is, more than I'd ever thought. And I had some great conversation from it too. So just on the topic of that, you see, I'm just getting all the water off here. So one of the points raised off of my last video was regarding radium, as in lume on the handles, and I suppose it's a very good point. Sorry, I'm just going to put back in the main wheel here and that sprocket, and you'll see what I was talking about earlier. One thing you should be concerned about with these old watches, especially old wristwatches, is the lume on the handles, and the little dots going around the outside is normally something radioactive. So if it were me, I'd not play with it unless it was really worth your life. But you take precautions. You wear the cots, you wear masks, something like that. Just stop them getting in your system. And you can see what I'm showing you this time is I now have a fancy oiler set as well with correct Mobius oils. I'm using I think it's HP 500 here to lubricate this part. It's not a fast moving part, but it does have quite a lot of friction, and it is, well, a steel on brass. And what I've done is I've dropped it into the gap, and I'm just spinning around that sprocket on the underside by hand, just to try and work it in. And then I'm just going to take off the excess, because a little goes a long way, but having less is going to be better than having too much, because having too much causes it to evaporate, turns into a grease, and then we're right back at square one within a short amount of time. And you see that sort of small sprocket there, that just gets pressed on with the tweezers, and that really is just as simple as that. So I've just pushed it back on. It's a lovely friction fit, no specialist tools required, and there you go. And you can see it's all back to working condition again, which is fantastic. And now we're back at the position that we was. Now this gel cushion is fantastic for disassembly, but when you've got an uneven rear surface, it does make your life slightly more difficult, which is why I'm glad to say that I've got a clamp coming, which is an actual vice to cinch down on that chassis of the watch. So first thing is this pallet fork. This is what sort of kicks round the that balance wheel, which is attached to the hairspring, and then we've got the escapement gear, which is got like a calibrated gap in it, I suppose. So that's constantly trying to turn, and as that pallet fork moves back and forth, it lets that escapement wheel move through a certain amount every time. And of course, it's all to do with time this, so you time that to be a second, and that's about what it is. And you see I make a brief mistake here. I drop that seconds minute in first, where in reality I don't really want to be doing that, and that's why I take it out then, so I can get this second sprocket in for the gear train. And like I say, you can see all these sprockets. They look very dark and brown and full of oxide, and unfortunately that transfers to all the teeth as well. Now, it would have been a nightmare to clean them, and I had no intention of lubricating them, so it makes getting this watch started a bit of a pig, frankly, because you have to keep starting it and let that oxide layer sort of wear off, so you're just brass on brass, because that's quite slippery and sort of self-lubricating. So I've got that balance wheel at the bottom, dropped in that cup, and then you've got to try and drop this bridge on, which is the downside to a pocket watch. You've got these massive bridges with lots of pivots going through them, is the correct term. I've since found out you've got all these pivots going through them, and you've got to try them, line them all up. So what I found is the best thing to do is to put her on, and then you've really got to employ your patience here. And what I found to do is to get that centre one lined up first, get it on the post, and then put a small amount of pressure on with your finger, and I mean small, because you don't want to bend these pivots. And then you just move them one at a time until it all falls into place. And now, if anyone's ever seen videos about picking locks, you'll understand why this is so similar. It's all about getting pins set and moving on back and forth, and you set one, which will allow it to drop down a little bit more, and then you try the rest of them, and frankly, I ran out of patience. When you run out of patience on a watch like this, the best thing to do is to just always stop, walk away from it, and come back. And that's exactly what I did do here, because I knew full well that if I didn't do, I was going to knacker it. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just getting that balance wheel dropped in, or just trying to get it dropped in. I'm just going to really align those pivots. You see that's what I'm doing there, dropping the balance in, get it on the center, and then I'm just going to go around pivot by pivot, and you'll move it and it'll click and drop down a little bit more, and you can try the other pivots and it'll click and then drop down a little bit more. And with these fob watches, the hardest thing to do is that main balance wheel, which springs back and forth. So what I'm doing there is I'm just undoing that bearing. You've got a bit of an end float adjustment there, so I'm just backing that out to make my life a little bit easier. And you can see that is just about there now. I think we're all just about there, so all we've got left to do now is put the screws in. So just as we drop these screws in again, I'm just going to reference some of the comments made against the last video once more. So again, I've been recommended to get finger cuts as I assemble them, and lo and behold, here they are. And you know what? It does make a difference, because it stops your fingerprints from getting all over them, stops the oils from your fingers getting all over the works and the movement, and it's really just best all round. So according to a viewer on my last video, the Smith's Empire, apparently that refers to the watches being made in Wales. I don't know why Empire relates to Wales, and I'd love if someone did know to give me a concise update below in the comments, and then I can share that to everyone who seems to watch. Because frankly, it just seems a bit backwards. But apparently they were made there until it was changed, and they were made in other places. But Smiths, of course, they made clocks for lots of British Leyland, lots of English vehicles, and this Ingersoll brand is all the same, because Ingersoll also made watches for Triumph, and times for Triumph you can get Ingersoll Triumph fob watches in this exact same model with the exact same face. Now you can see I've got these keyless works to put in, and just look at the colour on that little bit of chassis which is against it. Now I ain't seen note like that, especially on the last ones that I did. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get, I'm just going to open up another one of my new lubricants, which is another Mobius grease, and it's a proper silicon long life HT grease, and it's a lovely blue colour, as you're going to see. I'm going to lubricate that rather marginally on that keyless works, and it's just a very small drop in the middle there, and it's just to make your life that little bit nicer when you're rotating it. It's really for high friction steel on steel parts. That's what I'll use it for anyway. So as I was saying, as far as I can tell, the whole Smith's Ingersoll, it all seems to be the same, and that's quite common with British things of this period. You get a lot of Leyland, especially badge engineering, which is effectively the exact same vehicle, lots of shared components regardless, and it's looking different, made by, in air quotes, different manufacturers, but in reality they are the exact same. So how I've chosen to fit and remove this part, I don't know how it was done in factory. I mean, I could get a very fine thread and tie down the spring which is pushing against this, the one which fired it across when I was disassembling. But how I do this is I undo those two screws at the top and the bottom ones ever so slightly, and I'm just going to do it that little bit more just to show you. And it's fallen out. And I undo this just a very, very small amount, just to allow me to open up the bridge and chassis just enough to get that back in, get it all lined up, the cassellations on the slots, and then drop it back together. Now, one thing that isn't shown here, or you may not have been able to have seen, is as I undid that, the balance wheel fell out of position, so unfortunately I had to set that back up again, which is why I'm looking forward to doing some proper wristwatches, because frankly I'm fed up of having an entire train of wheels to set up and a balance wheel. And you know, there is an easy way to do these watches, as I found out on my last Smiths one. There's pins and stuff you can push out and reset it and set the backlash and end float all from factory, but frankly, you know, you can get away with just doing it how you want to do it. And you can see that's that back in there in the castellations. So that just needs dropping back down onto there and to do the screws back up. These screws, I absolutely hate them. They're so small and frankly a pain in the ass to put in. You'll see later on in this video how the screws which retain the chassis of the watch, the internals to the frame, the externals are so much better because they've got this nice little turned down step on the end, which is what I'd be expecting these to be honest. And you always seem to get it with small screws, but not really with big ones so much. So you see, I'm just adjusting the end float on the end of the watch there, and I'm just putting that back in a second time. Tell you when you're playing with these, the thing you want more than anybody else is patience. If you're not a patient person, then you really need to be able to step up and walk away from it. As indeed I did do twice on this project. I don't mind admitting that neither, because it's very easy for these things to get the better of you. And indeed this one did twice. You see, my outfit has changed. I was wearing a jumper at the start, and now I'm just wearing a t-shirt. And later on, all of a sudden, everything will become lovely and bright and sunny because I actually left it overnight, and I came back into it the next day because, frankly, if I didn't, it was going to get thrown out the window, which, well, really wouldn't have been the best for anybody. So if there's any comments or anything you'd like to make on the rate for doing this, please do feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'm not asking you to do it for the sake of it, or subscribe, all that sort of stuff. But I have enjoyed the dialogue generated off the last video. Frankly, I wasn't expecting it. So it's been really nice just to talk about this sort of stuff to people. And, I'm always one for advice and things like that. Because, like I say, I am new to this, and I am just some guy having a play. Luckily, I'm not going to do anything horrifically expensive. But there we go. Now, what I'm doing here is, finally, it's all back together, and I've just lubricated the point on that balance wheel, and you can see the cup there on this screwed in section for the bearing. Well, acts as a bearing, as a thrust bearing rather, but this is what sets your end float, and it's a pesky little devil, and the threads on it are so fine, so you need to be very careful. You want to make that about as central as you can get it, because you're going to fight with it if not. And you can see it really doesn't want to stay where you want it to, because it's got that pallet fork pushing against it the whole time. So what you can do, if you can't get it near, you've got to get that in, get it started, and then hold it in place as you do the screw up. Now with these small screws, these are a conventional right-handed screw, but you can see I'm actually turning it anti-clockwise. So I'm turning anti-clockwise until I find the thread start, and you'll feel it drop down, and then you can do it up. And you can see I'm just going to undo that slightly because I'm not quite in the right position on that wheel, and now I think I've about got it. So I'm just going to do it up, and it's a lot of back and forth, and I'm just going to, well, I actually did that off camera, it seems. I thought I had that on camera, but apparently not. So regardless, that's quite enough playing with balancing. I'm sure you've got the idea of what we're doing by now. So I've got all the pivots dropped in, and all we've got to do now is get the mainspring put back. So that is the mainspring case, and look at that lovely blue colour which is attached to that mainspring. So getting it out, I sort of walked it in thumb by thumb, and putting it back in is no difference. So no matter what, I've always got a thumb on top of the spring at all times, and I'm just going to walk it in from thumb to thumb, constantly pushing that tension around. So eventually you'll get it just about there, and it's just side by side by side, and eventually it'll just sort of drop in, and there you go. Look at that. Lovely blued colour, and that bluing is actually protecting the steel. A lot of people put a lot of grease and oil on at this point, and I prefer to not do unless it's necessary, because frankly, it's just going to evaporate out and cause a nightmare for you. So what I was showing there is there's a slot in the end of the spring, and there's a notch on the end of the anvil, or whatever it's called, and they align with each other. So that is now effectively one piece. And these are handed. So you can see we've got a step on one side and no step on that side, one hole there. If we use the unstepped side, of course it's going to foul against that that hour wheel, so it can only go in the one way. So what we've got to do is line it up, and you can see when we're right, because it's completely flush, just like that. And you can see I can actually put a couple of turns on it, which will keep the teeth of the top ratchet against the ratchet mechanism itself, and then we can put the final bridge on, the mainspring bridge. And the mainspring bridge is held in by 3 screws, and frankly they are, again, a pain in the arse to put in, because they are threaded all the way down to the ends, and they don't have the stepped section. So I've just skipped on just a little bit until we've got that done, because frankly you don't want to see me argue with screws for, well, hours. So what I'm doing now is I'm just putting a small amount of force into the mainspring, and you can see it is trying its best to kick into life. And I've actually got some tension on the minute hand at the moment, or the minute wheel. So again, I'm just going to file up by hand, and you can see it keeps kicking in and then stopping and kicking in and stopping. And although it was running at the start of this video, that is the same problem as I had when I was first coming into it. You know, it seems like when I bought it, it was coming in and stopping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it with some lubrication. Now, I've gone for the HP 500 oil. Again, it's the sort of heavier steel on steel contact oil, and I think this was actually a mistake. I think I actually wanted to use a lighter oil here, because although there are no jewels on this watch, it is just pivots going through a bit of steel. In reality, they probably should have been lubricated as if they were. So I think now this probably hasn't helped my case here. But one thing I have noticed in this hobby is that if you lubricate these pivot points up, it does indeed help the watch kick into life easier. So I've probably overcooked the lubrication. I do go around and clean it off, the excess afterwards, but I was just really trying to make sure that it does wick down between the shaft and the jewel hole, I suppose you may say. And you can see it really isn't too keen on getting going at this point, and I really do put it down to the whole oxidized brass scenario. But it does indeed start going. It just takes a lot more time than expected, and you can see that it's not taken too long, but here we are and we're running. Probably shouldn't put my fingers on the sprockets, but you can also see that we are now in daytime, as mentioned. So what I'm indicating here are the 4 screws which hold that massive bridge down to the chassis. And the reason I was showing you that was when I'd put it together the first time, I'd put it together in a way which had put tension on all the pivots, and frankly I'd locked the watch up. So what I did is I undid those 4 and I tightened them back up just ever so littly. Just put a little tweak on it, and I just kept doing that, going round and round, and eventually everything found its home, and the watch started ticking again of its own volition. So if you recall from my last videos, we were back on the crystal, and we're going to clean it, and I'm going to be cleaning it with the Humble toothpaste. You can get Polywatch and stuff, and it's all the same stuff. All it is a very mild abrasive suspended in a liquid. You know, this one's fluoride and minty, but they're all the same. Now, the crystal on this watch was actually really good, to be fair. Again, it was a little bit browned. I don't know if that's tobacco staining, if it's UV light which has caused it to brown up, or indeed if it was dyed from factory. I have no idea. What I do know is that with a small amount of elbow grease and, frankly, a bit of toothpaste, you can make a right difference on these, because, you know, I like to try and keep the original parts for the watches if possible, but you know, if you have to change a part, you have to change a part. But there's nothing wrong with this. It's not got any deep gouges in. All it needed was a bit of polishing. So all I've done is gone round it, and I'm just going to take off the excess of this this bit of a kitchen towel here, and we should be about good to go. And you can see that it is actually coming off brown. I don't know if that picks it up well on camera, but you can see it with the bare eyes. It was coming off brown, and must be taken off something then, I suppose. Now, I already know with these watches I'm treating them a little bit more agriculturally than you'd expect from wristwatches, and that is something which I'm going to be working on, because I do have some wristwatches to do, and I'm looking forward to perhaps finessing my technique. But nonetheless, it is exciting when you work on something like this, and it's so old, and it's not working quite right. And even if you don't get it factory fresh, I don't think something like this should look factory fresh anyway, but even if you don't get it that far, you get it better and you get it running, and I think there's something satisfying about that. So yeah, look at the gleam coming off of that now, and it has cleared it up just a little bit. So now it's time to put the face of the watch back onto the chassis. So you can see we are still ticking, and what we are going to do is just drop this hour wheel back on, so called because of course it holds the hour hand, that minute wheel being inside of it. So I'll drop that on there, then we're going to chuck this copper thrust washer on the top of that, and then it'll be time to put the face on. Now these faces are just pressed pieces of tin or aluminium. It looks aluminium to me, but I don't really know. Of course they can only go the wrong way, one way around. So all we've got to do is put her on, and then just bend these little tabs over. Which brings me on to a point in the last video. A lot of the eagle-eyed of you noticed that as I was bending over, one of the tabs looked to have snapped off and fell inside the watch. Now, I can actually say it wasn't the tab itself, it was actually just the paint had flaked and cracked off and did look like it fall inside the watch. And looking back at it, I completely understand. Quite fortunately, this didn't happen. It actually fell through the watch and was actually back on the bench when I checked, because I thought, bloody hell, I'm going to take this thing to bits. and dig her out. But no, sure enough, it's still going. It's still ticking actually, and I've actually just I've just sold it to a guy, which is good. So try and finance some further horological explanation, I suppose. So with this, what we have to do is we have to align this sprocket on the top here, and again, just look at the shine on these plated parts. That ultrasonics made a mess of the brass, but go on, Bennett, look how shiny that is. I think that's something I'm going to be doing in the future, is using it on the plated parts and the steel on steel parts. But I think with the brass, I'm just going to have to stick with the alcohol bath. Sorry, just to try and get the grease off them. And then what we do is we just put the frame on the outside, and these. Sorry, just to cut myself off. These are the screws I was referring to. Look at that with the turn down end, so they actually drop down into the thread, and then when you tighten them down, they're already seated. But sorry, just to talk across myself there, I actually aligned the slot on the on that winding wheel, and then you sort of put the chassis down on the outside of it, put the frame on the outside of the chassis, and then you can line it all up, rotate it a little bit, and then we can see all 4 of these screw holes, and we should be good to go. Now you can see, I'm just going to check that, yep, it's all in alignment, because when you rotate one, it rotates the lot, and look at it go. Absolutely great. So we're getting really near at the end of the work on this watch. So something to always bear in mind when we're doing up screws on this is never to overdo it, and especially when we've got multiple screws all on the same part. You'll see I tighten things up, and I'll either not tighten up all the way, or I'll tighten up until it pinches, and then I'll back it off just a little bit. And that's an old trick that I was taught to try and make things align, is because no matter what, you're always going to miss tolerances one way along the line. So if you put something in and tighten it up all the way, and the other 3 holes are missing, then all of a sudden you've got yourself an issue. So it's always best to get all the screws in first, and then you can systematically go around and tighten them up. So now I've got all the screws in, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go around and I'm going to tighten things up. And there we are. We have the watch back in its nice little frame, or chassis back in the frame, and we're good to go. And that's now a functioning and finished item. So all we need to do now is get the hands back on and get the two sides back on, and then that's it. She's good to go. So if you recall, the seconds hand came off in two pieces. You sort of had the tube, and then you had the hand itself sort of swaged onto that. Now what you can see there is I've actually just put those two pieces together just to make my life easier. And these hands really are just as simple as drop it over and then push it down till it clicks. And then one thing, which is one of my pet peeves, is to make sure that the hands all align. So that's now set up at 12. The hour hand and the minute hand is just escaping my tweezers at the moment. I should probably invest in some of those plastic tipped ones or wooden tipped ones, just to make sure I'm not going to knacker any of the faces I work on. I mean, one could argue that if you're just being careful, you should be okay. So what I'm going to do is just press that on just a little bit. Then I'm going to align the hands up so, you know, they're both on 12, because that would really, really upset me if it wasn't. And everything with these, you've got to be so careful. It's all such minute work, and unfortunately I've come from an engineering industry where minute to this detail, frankly, doesn't happen. So it's a case of really retuning your sensibilities to work as a horologist, basically. And that's now lovely and aligned with 12. And I'm just going to stop the watch there by stopping the balance wheel springing back and forth to put the minute hand on. Because I don't know why, but I'm always nervous that I'm trying to put the minute hand on. Oh, sorry, I keep saying minute, the second hand on, the one at the bottom. I'm always worried that that'll knacker it by trying to put it on as it's spinning. Now, something that's interesting about these old watches is indeed the second hand goes on down at the bottom. Quite frankly, that's because it's easier to put it on like that. You see the second wheel, as I was putting it on, you can just extend it through. And if you wanted to have it coming through the centre, as indeed most watches are now, you've got to put in at least 2 more gears, and you've got an end float bar to put in, similar to a later Smith's watch. But that's what needs to be. And you can see, there we are. Back the camera out of touch. It's all in together and ticking. And now what we need to do is just drop the crystal and the bezel back on, and then that'll be just about that. So unfortunately that gel cushion doesn't really allow you to push against it. I have actually got a case closer, but with these I just like doing it by hand, to be honest, because there's no reason not to. So I'm just going to give it a final little clean up, and there we go. We've got a nice little Ingersoll pocket watch, and this video is effectively the exact same as the Smith's video which I've already put up, except in my opinion this watch is perhaps a little bit more poorly. And there I'm going to be just comparing the time against my latest watch purchase, the Omega Speedmaster, which, believe you me, I am not going to be opening up because I don't want to destroy it. Indeed, so there you go. That's the Ingersoll pocket watch, effectively the same as a Smith's pocket watch, just done. So I've got a lot of points to learn off from this. Don't use that ultrasonic cleaner on the brass components, because it'll just kill it. And I didn't kill it, it just makes getting it starting again much more difficult. And also, watch out with these watches, because I sincerely think that a lot of these pivots were bent, because it seems to run much better in some angles than others. It's okay now, it's had a little bit of service on it, but it does certainly run better in some angles than others, and apparently that can happen as a result of overwinding the watch. So there it is, with that lovely wear on the back of it, just like it's been in and out of someone's pocket for about 40 years. And just everything with these is nice. The fonts and the colours and the loud noises, it's brilliant. So there we are. Thank you very much for watching.